So really quickly
All right,
here,
so today we're going to talk about how to make line graphs. It might be a little bit different than bar graphs you're used to, but basically line graphs are used to show change over time. So almost always on a line graph, one of our axes is going to be time, and the other one is going to measure what's changing during that time. So for this example, I'm going to look at my data here. I'm going to make myself a little data table to record my data, and I want to look at the average high and low temperature over the last 5 days. So first I'm put my time. Here's my days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So those are things that don't change. The days of the week are going to happen all the time. Those are not things that are going to change. The other thing I want to look at is the high temperature. So I'm going to write this in red. I also want to look at the low temperature, so I'm going to write that in blue. So again, this one is the low temperature, and here in the red we're going to be looking at the high temperature. So I'll go ahead and just kind of put some random figures in here, some random numbers, and let's figure out how to graph these. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to need is graph lines here, my axis lines. So I'm going to start by putting my time on the bottom. Okay, these are my independent variables, right? These are the things that don't change. So I'm going to write my days of the week down here, and that means that these are the times that I'm going to test the temperature. These are the times that I'm going to test my independent variable. So almost always on line graphs, we're going to put time or units of time on the bottom. The next thing I need to think about are the numbers that are going to go on the side. This is called my number scale. So for ours, I'm going to put my smallest number here at the bottom. A lot of times you start at 0, but we'll always want to put our highest number at the top. Okay, so I want to try to use this entire line. I don't want to put my smallest number at the bottom and then, say go by 10. So I want to figure out what numbers, how many numbers do I need to skip to make sure 32 is the bottom and my biggest number is the top. Okay, if I go by 10, I'd be 32, 42, 52, 62, and then I'd only be using this much of the graph, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to figure out exactly how many lines can I fit in here, how many numbers do I have to skip. And this might not always be an option. If you have graph paper, you might not get to choose and draw lines. You might just see, okay, I have 13 lines or 12 lines, and figure out what your number scale has to be. Okay, so I went ahead and drew 15 lines here, so I'm going to skip every 2 and write in all my temperatures here. So I went 32, 34, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44, 46. Now you don't actually have to write on all these lines. If I wanted to skip a couple lines, I could, as long as I kept my number scale. So I could only write a number every 5 of my little marks if I kept with my number scale. But it is very, very important that we have a good number scale so that we use the biggest amount of our graph. We want to use as much space as possible. Okay, so here I'm getting towards the top of the graph. I'm getting my biggest numbers put up. And now let's look at how do we get some of our data put onto this graph. All right, so the first thing I need to do is decide what color dots I'm going to use. I'm going to use red for high temperature. I'm going to use blue for low temperature. Okay, so I want to graph what were the temperatures on Monday. So I'm going to put a dot on this line if I was going to go straight up from there. And I'm going to put a dot on that line at 47, which is the high temperature. And I'm going to put another dot at 32, which was my low temperature for that day. So those are both measurements on Monday. So both those dots are going to go on the line for Monday. Okay. Okay, now for my second day of the week, I'm going to go down here. Now I'm going to pretend there's a line going straight up here. If you have a piece of graph paper, you would actually have a line. But I basically want to see, okay, where do my temperatures meet this line I just drew? So if the high temperature is 50, I'm going to see where does 50 meet that line that goes straight up from Tuesday, from my time. So I'm going to draw a dotted line, comes up from there. I'm not actually going to probably draw this, but just kind of like in my head, I'm drawing this line, and then I'm going to put a dot where those two lines would meet, my high temperature, and then the same thing for my low temperature. So at 38, I can kind of imagine there's a dotted line that comes straight out, and I want to put a dot where those two lines meet. I'm going to do the same thing for my next day of the week or my next unit of time, if it's seconds or hours or whatever, in our case, days of the week. Okay, straight line, imaginary line up from Wednesday, and I'm going to put a dot where my high temperature meets that line, which is at 53, and I'm going to put a dot where my low temperature meets. Now, I'm going to continue doing this. I don't always have to do high temperature, low temperature at a time. I can do all the low temperatures. I can do all the high temperatures. But the important thing is that for each day of the week, because I'm measuring 2 things, there are 2 dots on that imaginary line going up. Now, there's a couple Things I can do from here, the simplest is just connect these dots. So I'm going to connect these dots in order, and that's going to show me a trend over time. So in this case, the trend of the temperature over a week. So this shows me that throughout the week, it generally got warmer. The other thing I could do is I could draw kind of a line of best fit where I try to fit half my dots on top and half the dots on bottom. So my line of best fit in this case looks something like this. And that shows me that overall there's an upward trend. Okay, so I'm not worried so much about the ups and downs. I'm kind of taking an average, and that shows me on average over the last 7 days it got warmer. And so I do the same thing down here. I try to fit half my dots in between. I see an average, on average, it tended to get warmer even on the average cold temperatures. Now that is good for showing me increase and decrease on average without really worrying about, oh, well, it was really hot this day and really cold that day. It's telling me on average what's happening over a period of time. Okay, and so that's kind of the basic idea of how to make a line graph. Now, if you, for instance, had another 2 or 3 sets of data here and you wanted to look at precipitation and, you know, maybe, I don't know, average temperature, you can do that. You would just then be adding more lines, you know, and more colors here. You'd be adding more dots. So instead of having 2 dots per line, I'd have 2 more dots. And I'd be connecting, instead of 2 line graphs, I'd have 3 lines. And the more lines you add, sometimes it gets more confusing, but sometimes it's a good way to look at a lot of extra data. So hopefully this helped. Please let me know if you have any more questions.